Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Fire Emblem, Crimson Flower in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 31, Taking an Early Leave. She was unable to properly sleep. Billette had been attempting her hardest to try and get proper rest, but once more she was suffering from insomnia. Usually, her brother was the one going through this process, and it was only on a few occasions that Billette was the one victim of it. Still though, it had made sense as to why she could not sleep. Ash had been on her mind for the whole of the night, and Billette had been through a very rough process of tossing and turning across her bed. Eventually, she got out, pacing across the room in thought. It was somewhat of a relief not having her brother scold her for such pedantic behavior. Slumping over and over on the bed, getting up and repeating the process, and looking out of the window to see whether the sunrise had started, these were the things Billette was doing for hours on end. As expected, it did not help her. Eventually giving up, she changed out of her sleeping wear and opened the door. All of the students had been sleeping, and if Billette listened carefully, she could hear distant sounds of snores from certain rooms. It was far too early in the morning for anyone to be doing their usual checkups, so Billette was happy to have left at this time. Either way, her authority as a teacher meant she could do as she pleased, but Seeth's disapproval of her had made her act just as timid as the rest of the students in the dorm rooms. She slowly paced herself downstairs, making as little sound as possible. As she followed the stairs downwards, she had remembered her meeting with Lonato was chanced to happen. She wanted dearly to help Ash. It was too long a time to wait before it took place, and Billette was far too impatient a person to abide by these circumstances. Who could she talk to open the academy gates? If she remembered correctly, once, Petra had mentioned she sometimes woke up early to hunt in the mornings. For spare activities revolving the outside, Seeth was usually the one whom Petra would seek permission from to go hunting. Great. As much as Billette had not wanted to bother Seeth, the cards she had been dealt with were not kind to her. For the first time since Ash had confessed to her, Billette had doubts. Still, she tried to strengthen her resolve. Billette made way towards the offices near Ria's hall. The sky outside was still dark, and the wind had been eerily turbulent as of late, but Billette continued. She had been far too restless to care for the weather stopping her. It was as if the world had been telling her to stop. Billette knew that decision was ultimately up to Seeth. She arrived, and seeing a light in his door, she knew he was awake. She knocked on his door. Billette imagined his ignorance from inside must have been him thinking he had imagined her knock, however she continued once more. "Come in," the voice eventually gave in. He must have been imagining who it could possibly be. As Billette entered, she saw Seeth still looking keenly at his own desk. Slowly coming in, Billette tried her hardest to disperse with any regrets she had in coming. She tried her hardest to do away with Seeth's position over her. She told herself she would be far more scared if she were just a usual student, and she was lucky to even have an opportunity to speak with him. Sitting down, Billette tried to ready herself to speak with him. Finally, no longer looking down, she eyed him across the face. "I'm really sorry for intruding so early, but I wanted to speak with you." Now, he looked up from his work, and setting it aside, he faced Billette. "I would assume it's of urgency, seeing as you woke up this hour to speak with me." Billette looked guiltily at him. "I should apologize for my work being everywhere." No, it's no hassle," Billette interjected. I wanted to speak to you about this month's mission. You are aware that it is too late to cancel, correct?" "Yeah, I am." She did not know where to start. Talking to Seeth was more overwhelming than she had anticipated. "From what I remember, we needed to observe over the nights taking care of the rebellion in the west part of Fodlan, but I heard apparently a famous lord had been leading the trouble going on there. Lord Lonato," Seeth remarked. "Yes, him, I mean." Finally getting to the heart of the conversation, Billette had charged ahead, both out of impatience and desperation. "He's Ash's adoptive father. I came here today to tell you that I don't like this mission." The minimal reactions given by Seeth had told her he was not surprised by this outcome, and that he was not denying this was a brutal reality to accept. He stroked his chin, thinking deeply about how it is he should deal with Billette. As the teacher looked at him, she felt inversely aggravated at him. Billet did not at all want to be seen as an obstacle that needed to be calmed down. Readjusting her stance on the situation, she tried once more to talk, but Seath interrupted her. From the records I read prior, the boy is a soft one. If you want me to do something about this situation, then it would be wise to explain it all to me first. Right. Before Billet proceeded, she quickly had to add one more thing of note. Also, thank you for hearing me out so early in the morning. I'm really sorry to interrupt your usual routine. I'm an advisor and a counselor. It is my job to hear everyone out and determine the best course of action. I can imagine it must be tiring. Seath did not acknowledge this statement, but his silence was enough for Billet to see he had implied it. Remembering what had happened the evening prior, she returned to her primary goal. About Ash, well, I know it sounds a little far-fetched, but he wanted to speak to me for a while. Billet proceeded telling him everything. About his failed attempt to converse with Byleth, about his childhood, about Lonato and his favorite book, about all the help he had given her in their shopping trip, and about the tears he shed in front of Billet. These were likely memories that Ash would have been embarrassed to reveal himself, but as a teacher, Billet had needed to do so. Seath listened, with little objections, and no looks of concern or hesitation. After taking some time to consider the story told to him, his face funneled a slightly concerned expression. It was not wise of you to promise him that you would be victorious, and neither was it a good idea to tell him he could attend this mission so haphazardly. Legally, no student is allowed to help another class mission up until the Garland Moon has approached. Admittedly, even if we are in that month right now, you would have needed to go through the standard procedure to prove that you were capable of protecting Ash. Ignoring that latter part at least, your biggest mistake to him was ensuring your success. What do you mean? Billet asked, feeling pressured from the criticism being given. Lonato rebelled against the church. Lady Rhea does not take kindly to that sort of behavior, and as of now, we have even reached lives being lost as a result. Wanting to ensure a happier outcome for Ash and Lonato is a difficult thing to wish for, and an even harder scenario to achieve. Shouldn't I try, at least? You forget, Professor, that a teacher leads their students towards a better way of living. Whilst doing that, they are meant to also let them be aware of when a situation has reached a dire level that can never be accounted for. Billet showed some frustration. These were the words she feared and wanted most not to hear. In her mind, she tried her hardest to think. Byleth was always able to come up with a strategy. In their battles, he was always the tactician. Yet still, Billet wanted to show her potential. She wanted to help Ash, and she wanted to prove her role as a professor. Looking at Seath once more, she eyed him determinedly. Even still, a professor should prevent casualties, and make sure every student, even the ones that aren't their own, is able to live a happier future. With the situation with Lonato, I want to do just that. I want to help. Bowing down on her chair, she asked, as formally as she could plead. I know I'm not the most responsible, or the most trustworthy, but I still want to do all I can. If you could please just let me leave early to try and do some early work, then I can at least be satisfied. She pulled herself back up again. Please, Seath. The advisor had the authority to undermine her. He could easily have rejected Billet, reprimanded her, and sent her away to never discuss this again. He could do all this, and yet he simply got up from his chair, looked through his shelves, and handed a piece of paper to Billet. It was a map. I'm sure you're aware of who Catherine is, correct? She's the knight we'll be working with. I remember brother told me before. She has a history with Lonato. She was dispatched for that very reason. She's the only one strong enough to deal with him. He could tell Billet had figured out what he was implying. Sitting back down again, he pointed his hand across the western area of the map showcasing Fodlan. I can only pull so many strings to help you, but talking to Catherine might be the push you need to avert the situation you've gotten yourself into. You mean? I can help. I will inform your brother about your decision, whilst you get an early start. You can go as early as today. I just want you to know that with what you are trying to accomplish, it will likely not follow the outcome you want in the end. She ignored Seath's remark. Thank you, Seath. I mean it. Ride on horseback. It is far quicker. She got up, and whilst she was quick at first, Billet looked back before closing the door. You're a lot nicer than you seem. As a person, I want to help you, but as an advisor, I see this as a downwards learning experience for you. Be careful. She turned back, and before shutting the door fully, Billet said her final remark. If that's how you choose to roll with it, then I won't get in the way. Still, I just want to say I really appreciate you handling my mishaps, regardless of my decisions. Shutting the door, she left Seath to continue his work. She walked to the stables. Billet had known that horses traditionally could survive with minimal sleep, so it was an optimal fit. She had never been in the stables before, and it was a surprise to be visiting for the first time. Billet simply had one thing in mind, and that was to find a horse. She recognized one of them. It was Gertrude, the one which her father had rode on their travels. Gertrude was a horse whom Billet had a rocky relationship with at first, but over time they had bonded with difficulties in their way. She still had a distaste for horse riding throughout her childhood, but just this once, she wanted to set aside her differences and work with a horse like him. Gertrude recognized her, and walking towards her, she pet him as a sign of friendship. Eventually mounting him, Billet slowly rode on. The knights up front had been informed by Seath already about her mission. As they opened the gate, they wished her luck. Before fully leaving, however, a voice had shouted its plea to her. Professor Billet, wait. She turned back, signaling for her steed to slow down. Beyond the gate was Ash. He was already dressed in his uniform. Billet, whilst initially surprised, spoke to him with calm. What's wrong, Ash? I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. He looked up at Billet, to which she offered him a smile. Me and you are similar. I can tell. I'll bet you wanted to tell me you wanted in on this mission, right? Ash walked closer to her. He confessed. I do. Hop on. She ignored Seath's previous warnings. To Billet, all that mattered was the mission. She could deal with the legal proceedings after everything was settled with. I'll take you there, Dash. I do, Professor, but I'm still scared. I thought about it all night. I couldn't sleep, and my mind kept playing these memories over and over about your words to me, and about the day I met Lonato. In the end, I feel Lonato had his reasons for things, and he wouldn't like me to see him like this. I don't want that either. Professor Billet, I'm sorry, but I can't go with you. She understood his reasons. All Billet wanted at this moment was to send her proof to him that everything would be okay, but all she had to show for herself was empty promises. Seath warned her, and Ash cried for her, but Billet herself wanted deep in her heart to stay unfazed. Thinking deeply into what Ash had asked, Billet gave all she had into her final words to Ash. I'll do everything I can for you. From this day on, we're friends, so don't ever feel that you're betraying me. She signaled for Gertrude to turn back to continue their journey. As Billet rode on, she waved her arms, refusing to look back. I'm going to talk to Lonato, and I refuse to come back with you upset, so don't worry. I'm here for you. Just wait here with a cheer on that solemn face of yours. That's all I ask in return. Her silhouette was vanishing. Ash ran after her for a second, but stopped. His eyes started tearing up. Seeing Billet leave as the morning sun rose was inspiring. Just as Lonato had once done so for him once, Billet had given him hope for a better outcome. He did not look down. Instead, his head gazed at the brightening sky. Once again, Ash thought to himself of all that had happened prior, and for the first time in the month of the Garland Moon, he believed things would turn out all right. Wiping his tears away, he realized he had to give his payment to Billet. To keep up a cheerful face was what she asked for, and Ash wanted to do just that. Chapter 32, A Noble's Influence. They had clashed their swords once again. As their swift movements broke against the wind, the man observing the battle watched them intently. Timing their battle, Jurit saw, the man tasked with keeping an eye on the training ground, observed Petra and Casper. They had gotten better. Landing a good blow, Petra would be weakened but was always quick to recover. Casper had a hard time dealing with her as a result. The girl's speed and agility, much like her tenacity, had been honed and polished to perfection since childhood. As she rushed towards Casper, she sidestepped to the opposing sides to avoid his swings. Finally, she blew his arm on the opposing side. Unlike the many times before, Casper had held onto his weapon this time. If he were to react quickly, he would have easily countered Petra before she rushed in. "That's enough," Juritsah ordered, with his usual strained voice. The two halted their fighting. Handing their weapons back to Juritsah, the man inspected their quality for a brief moment. Juritsah was unlike many of the staff in the officers' academy. He wore a mask to shade his upper face, revealing the lower pale bottom beneath it. His long, blonde hair had been neatly ordered to flow down the sides of his face. His uniform consisted of a large armor plate across his left shoulder, alongside a fancy garb with a crimson collar. He was a man with tall stature and an incredibly unnerving presence. Occasionally, he spoke in mutters, making up his very own dialect of speech. Many of the students had been afraid of him, however. His dedication to helping and keeping the training hall in order had proved his loyalty to the church, and he had been working under them for many years as a result. Thanking the man before them, he eyed the two suspiciously. "I would hope to fight one of you in battle one day." "One day, big guy," Casper bellowed proudly. Petra chuckled. Her classmates' innocent ignorance had been amusing. "You are having much improvement." "Well, I couldn't have done it without you, could I?" "I think so, too. Look at you acting proud for once. It's a rare sight. Usually, you're a little bashful." Petra nodded. Walking out of the halls together, the sunset had finally risen. It had been a few days since Billet had left. When she did, it came as a surprise to the class. Even Byleth had been told very little of her departure, but they all knew she had wanted an early start of some sort. Thankfully, no student had to suffer a dull lesson without her, as she had left on the day of their last weekend off. Still, though, it was clear something was amiss, and each student had missed seeing Billet skip happily across the grounds on their free days. "Our missions today, right?" Casper asked. "You ready?" "Yes, but I am having reserves." "Reservations, you mean?" "Yes. I am having reservations, about this mission, and about you." Petra stopped. "I am feeling doubt. I do not know if I truly forgive you, but I do not dislike you either. Confusion is inside me." Still walking forward, Casper looked back. "I expected as much, honestly." "That's fine. Either way, I'll patiently wait for the day that you come around and forgive the actions of my father. Even if I took a life's time." Turning back, he looked solemnly at her but acknowledged their circumstances. "Yeah, you can take a life's time, all right. I'll still be real happy after waiting for that long. Trust me on that." Smiling, she joined after Casper. It was strange. She felt unnerved around her peer, but at the same time, they had developed a strange friendship. At the very least, she was happy to have been making more relationships at the academy, even if it consisted of some extremely unorthodox ones. Despite traveling on horseback, Billet had taken time to fully adjust to Gertrude's habits. The horse had been far too attached to Geralt already, and Billet had failed to account how much that would impact her if he were to be carrying someone else. Occasionally, she would fall off. Many times, she had to tempt the horse with the satisfaction of carrots to even bring Gertrude to move. This, coupled with the amount of stamina needed to mount the tall steed in the first place, had made Billet dearly wish she walked on foot instead. Regardless, she was near the area that Catherine was supposedly situated in. Taking the time to stop by a nearby village, Billet entered the town inside. She deserved a rest, and she cared not for the fee needed to drop Gertrude in a developing stable. The man in charge of the area was kind to her. Seeing her trouble in managing the horse, he helped Billet down. "Not the most manageable lad you picked, eh? Tell me about it." "He's my father's, but I needed to use him today since it was an emergency." Chuckling at her misfortune, the stable manager offered Billet a free bottle of freshly made beer, to which she declined. "Sorry. I don't exactly drink that stuff. It never interested me." Giving an understanding look, he instead gave Billet a cold glass of water freely before she set off. Yeah, it might be difficult to get out of here for a bit, so I personally recommend an inn, regardless of whatever emergency you got there. Oh. Like a child, Billette sipped on her water with enthusiasm. It might be just the difficulty I'm here for. If I may ask, is it alright if you tell me what's up with this town? He was a kind man. As Billette finished her drink, he refilled it for her when it looked as if she was still needing more. Nodding to her as she gulped her next filling, he looked out, onto the bustle of the town nearby. Some noble, I think his name was, Lonato, wanted to do something for everyone. The issue is, the central church didn't take nicely to those sorts of stuff, so I hear there's some fight up west. Central church. Billette said, before sipping on her cup once more. If you didn't know, the church is made up of different sides. Contrast into popular belief, the West don't exactly enjoy the central side. Old man Lonato has his own grudges against them, but I wouldn't completely know. Billette noticed whilst drinking that the stable manager had taken a neutral stance on this subject. Finishing her drink once again, she had to state her business, in hopes of getting a reaction. I'm a teacher from the officers' academy, so I came here since a student from another class of mine asked a favor of me. Oh, helping an outsider. You're a nice one. Yeah. I've come from the central side, but I'm mainly just there to teach. I don't think I'm here to take sides. I see. Taking the glass, he took this opportunity to speak quietly towards Billette. Look, you already seem like the nice sort, so I'll speak honestly with ya. Both sides, central and west, have got their fair deal of shade going on around them. I don't exactly have too much of an opinion for both of them. Right, Billette thought aloud, acknowledging her lack of information. I suppose that makes sense. I'll admit, not even I know too much, myself. I just have one question, though. Ask away. Does everyone in this town share the same thoughts on the two churches' sides? A few odd ones in the bunch, but a fair majority do, yeah. Something must have aggravated Lonato to go against the central church. If he was a supposedly kind-hearted individual, then what exactly was it that could make such a person fight? Billette wondered this for a while now. In her years of being a mercenary alongside Geralt and her brother, she had remembered her father sheltered her from those reasons. Her childhood was hard enough as it was, and Geralt had not wanted her to suffer anymore. Still, she wanted to know to what extent people would kill. What would make you join him? Lonato, I mean. The stable manager thought long and hard about this question. Thinking deeply into this topic, Billette noticed he was taking some serious thought to please her. Eventually concluding, he spoke, as if he was sure this was the right one. I'd fight if I wanted to undo a wrong. Whether it be killing, stealing, or wrongfully accusing someone of so and so, it'd have to be a big deal. In the grand scheme of things, these sorts of battles only fill a warrior with motivation, if they're going at it for the bigger picture. Hard to explain, but I'm sure you get it. Right, I see. Nodding her head in approval, she smiled kindly at the man. Thanks for the water, sir. It's been nice to talk to someone, even if it was about something so morbid. Pleasure's mine. Take your steed when it suits you best. If I'm not around, just go in and leave the money at the till to head off. You seem like the type who wouldn't waste their reputation, especially as a supposed teacher of the officers' academy. Oh, thank you. I'll be sure to take you up on that offer. Chuckling at her happiness, he said his final words. You've got the mind of a child, you know that? I'd hate to taint your innocence, so the best advice I'll give is you stay safe out there once you head out. I will. Thank you. Closing the door to the stable, Billette looked around the town. It was a small developing faction, but being in such a place had its moments of niche air that Billette treasured. She did as she usually did. Browsing the stalls, admiring the playing children, and giving a few coins for those asking for it. Billette had tried to view the optimism in such a run-down town. The people there had accepted their commoner-born circumstances, and as such, they had made a life of their own. Seeing this sort of resourcefulness was always an inspiring sight. Eventually, she would need to leave. The students would catch up in only a few days, and Billette wanted some time to properly talk with Catherine. The worst scenario she could imagine was that Lonato would be slain, without leaving a wish behind. Billet wanted dearly to convince him of his wrongs. Surely, he could go down a better path. Believing that, the hopeful teacher had decided upon leaving in a few hours. Noticing a lone hill nearby, Billet jogged towards it. She sat herself down near a lonesome tree and thought of the worries she had on her mind. She wanted peace for Ash. Feeling at home in the clean weather, she thought of his relationship with Lonato. Her father, Geralt, was always aloof in his ways. Occasionally, she enjoyed his presence, but something was always amiss for Billet. Seeing Ash cry so lovingly for his own adoptive father had told Billet this was more so the case, and she wanted to figure out more about it. Even if the odds were stacked against her, Billet wanted to try her hardest to correct Lonato's wrongs. Slowly getting up after some time had passed, she had thought of the stable manager. He was a kind soul, and truthfully, Billet was thirsty once more from walking around the town. If he did not offer it to her in the end unlike he had done prior, she always had the change needed to pay for it in the end. Walking back down the bumped hill, she could hear a thumping noise. It was the sounds of footsteps, multiple of them. She was intrigued. Just as a child would do, her curiosity had made her eventually run in wanting to know more. Stumbling downwards, she ran back into the main part of the town. Slowly, she had continued treading carefully across, walking past each edge of the houses to grow ever closer to each clicking and clacking. Louder, the sounds were getting clearer. Horses could be heard, and so too could the sounds of gruff voices gathering the public. Billet knew. Even someone like her could figure out what this sort of movement was. It was a mass gathering, a public speech made to spark some sort of action. Everyone, the Lord of the Gaspard region has come to speak with you all. A masked mage had shouted, alerting everyone. Looking across the crowds, Billet could also notice that the stable manager from before had also had his interest piqued. He has an important announcement, and would like to get everyone's attention. She had found the man she was looking for. As the mage cleared the way for a horse to walk through, Billet had noticed a peculiar figure above it. He was tall, wide, but strong-looking. His white hair, mustache, and eyebrows had been straightened slightly rough, but all anyone had needed to truly distinguish his noble standing was the plated armor across his body. His saggy looks, although containing wrinkles a many, had contrasted with the very fact that he had wanted to fight on this very day. He was old, but clearly, that had not stopped him. Everyone. His voice bellowed, continuing further across his speech. Billet eyed him. This man was none other than the one she was looking for. My name is Lonato, and for all those who don't know me, I am the Lord of the Gaspard region, wanting to ask for all your support. Is this about the fighting going on outside of town? A random voice yelled. We don't want any part of it. Just like that, the entire town had boomed in voice. They all shared the same thoughts, and it was looking as if Lonato was losing the attention he had once had. Rather than joining in as she had wanted to, Billet kept intently looking at Lonato. She had heard he was involving those around him to work alongside his forces, but surely he must have gotten a similar reaction with all of the towns similar to this very one. Surprisingly, the noble lord was not fazed. Unmounting his steed, the man once again bellowed his voice. You are all uneducated, accepting reality as it borders your ears. You think not of the bigger picture, and I have nothing but understanding and sympathy for that kind of lifestyle. The crowd quietened down as if they were hypnotized by his words. Powerless to do anything, you do not take up arms, unless strictly necessary. A fitting choice for ones such as yourselves, but I have seen the worst of it as a result. I have seen the horrors of those church scum. Many times, they have imprisoned, sanctioned, and killed those that they chose to love, yet unfairly treated for acts they had not fully known they did. My son, he was one of them. The poor boy is still lying in that monastery, close to the best friend that killed him, close to the enemy he had once shared tender memories with. He is still deeply thought of, and I miss him dearly. Billet wanted to speak up at this moment. What was all of this information she was being given? Ash was still in the monastery, sure, but he was far from dead. Those church scum executed my son before my very eyes. The boy meant no harm, and he loved the academy and the church's teachings with all his heart. At this, a depressed air was felt across the town. They had all felt it. Many of the parents in that very town had been wounded deep in their hearts, imagining the kind of pain it might have brought. Some, who had once suffered from seeing their children go through illness, had already related to the idea. Even those without the experience, who all realized someone innocent had been taken away, were moved deeply. "Everyone, I ask of you a favor." Once more, he bellowed. His voice had rung loud. This was it. It was the highlight of his speech. "We don't deserve to be ruled by lying, ignorant, and selfish scum. We don't deserve to be ruled by those who look at us as unworthy of their knowledge. We do not deserve to suffer, whether we be noble or commoner, by their hands, as an excuse to cover up their spoiled, bloody hands." Every word he poured had fired out into the unknowns of the town. His raw emotion was even enough to offset the elderly and children alike. Billet felt shaken at this, confused at all he narrated. Regardless, it was true that the boom in his voice was fueled by some sort of hate, and the source of that hate must have been truly immense. "I ask you to take up arms. I want you all to assemble towards Magdrid Way, where the witch who turned over my son marches towards my supposed slaughter. I want you all to join my troops, to rally our endurance, and rebel against the scaffolding that mistreated us." Billet wanted to shout out, to call out against him. To mention all of her fond memories of the academy, and the kindness often displayed previously by those such as Seath, who although mysterious, had more than opened their arms to the twins. Billet could remember that despite still having his reservations, Seath had allowed her to carry out her wishes. She wanted to believe they were still good people inside. Still, though, the nightmare was unfolding as Lonato had wished it. Despite only hearing the words of the noble before them, they had all retreated to their homes, coming out with weapons as their solution to the issue. These people would have had to work their absolute hardest to attend places such as the officers' academy, and so too would they have to sacrifice a lot. This sort of information was priceless to them, so they had to believe every word. Looking horrified at their actions, Billet faced Lonato, feeling an array of mixed emotions. This was the kind man she was told of, who was also Ash's adoptive father. She wanted her hardest to talk to him. As she made her first step, Billet heard it. As if he was there, Byleth stopped her. Thinking about it more clearly, she realized that if her brother were truly there, he would have always wanted her to do the opposite of what she desired. This was not the academy, but a battlefield scenario. Ever since childhood, Billet had to accept that her brother's voice was law, and his choices were the ideal actions to take. Thinking back, she left. As much as it hurt her to do so, she knew Byleth would have concerned the mission at hand over the emotions portrayed by those around them. She wanted to save these people, but doing so could have spelled the end of everything if she failed. Rushing back, she swore to herself that she would talk to Lonato. This was more than just a mission to reunite family now. It was one to find out the truth of all that mattered to her, and to save innocent lives. Going into the stables, she had seen the manager with a solemn face. It was clear that he was convinced by Lonato, but it was also a fact that Billet told him she was dispatched to stop him. Billet looked down uncomfortably, and in regret, she handed both the dagger in her sheath, as well as the sword on her waist on the counter. "I don't want to fight my way out of this town, so I can accept my mistake of coming here in the first place." The man looked at her. His previous smiles and laughter had been chased out with regret and solemnness. He took her weapons from the counter and handed them back to her. "Leave," he ordered. "You're not like what Lonato described those church folks, but you're still one of them. If anyone knows what both sides of the coin are looking like, it's you. In all honesty, I don't believe you'd do it, but it's worth a shot. Get out, and get cracking on stopping all this. I don't want you dead by the end of this." Billet took a moment to realize what was going on around her, but then she took the weapons she had desired. Nodding her head in shy gratitude, she searched for Gertrude and unlocked his cage. Mounting the steed with difficulty, she looked across, facing the stable manager. "I don't want you to die either, mister." Before signaling for Gertrude to trot, she looked at the movement taking place outside. "If you ever get close to Lonato, ask him to look for the girl called Billet." Upon hearing her name, the man nodded. A wonderful name, for a wonderful teacher. Your students must all love you, he said. I won't die, and neither won't I forget your favor. Thank you, sir. You've done so much for me. I appreciate everything. As if looking at her was a wound to himself, the stable manager looked away. Learning her name had helped tie the strings of empathy to his emotions, and he had regretted hearing it. He simply walked off, trying his hardest to fulfill Biletta's favor at this very moment. Looking at the closed door, she signaled Gertrude to trot away. In her heart, she knew the manager had meant well. He was a kind man, and whilst he fought for a seemingly noble cause, Bilette knew his probable death would not be deserved. Finally, after all this time, getting the hang of Gertrude, she hurried to the best of her abilities, where Catherine and the knights would be situated. Chapter 33, The Start of a Dire Battle. Without Bilette around, there was much more silence for the class on their walk to Magdrid Way. There was no upbeat chatter to enlighten them, and neither was there any excess noise. The class were in a much different mood than usual. It was not that the class had lost their spirit, but they all felt it was a different experience than before to only be with a single of their instructors. Rather than being a big group, many of the students had combined together into their own miniature circles. These consisted of Dorothea, Bernadetta, and Petra in one, Caspar, Ferdinand, and Linhard in another, as well as Hubert and Edelgard in the last cluster of students. The battalions owned by Petra and Edelgard were in two bundles at the back, only situated to follow orders once the battle had started. Byleth led the pack in front, occasionally looking back to see if anyone had gotten lost. Without his sister, he had to take a few extra steps to make sure everyone was all right. You're awfully silent, you know that. Suthies propped up, skipping beside him in the front as he walked. Do not worry about me being seen. Only the eyes of yourself are able to do such things. I promise you no extra hassle this time. I could assume such. You have been talking to me less as of recently. Byleth flexed his eyes, but refused to look in her direction, so as not to alert suspicion. Neither have you been worrying about me. Looking back, Suthies childishly inspected all of the students. In this state, she was only able to observe them, but it entertained her to see their behavioral patterns up close for the first time. Noticing Edelgard, she marched back to Byleth, still looking backwards at the Adrestian princess. Admit it, what that girl told you is still bothering you. I am her teacher. I should be concerned. You are an imbecile. You should be aware that this is not coming out of responsibilities, but your own worries. Byleth ignored her, still walking without an acknowledgement of Suthi's presence. Sighing defeatedly, she looked away from the girl. I know by now that I will never have my way with you. May I at least ask if you reported what happened on that night to your sister? Would you not already know if I did? No, because someone enjoys doing things without my knowledge, whilst I am asleep. In that case, no, I did not tell sister. I thought it was not of her interest to know. Expecting her to be annoyed, Byleth was left perplexed when he saw the young girl excited at his response. Hide it all you want, but that is the first selfish act I have seen you do in the years I have been with you. She smirked slightly. At least you are growing more human in some aspects, I suppose. I cannot expect you to always take leaps and bounds with everything you do, after all. Suthies was ignored. The air was thickening. As Byleth checked to see if the students were managing, Suthies stopped walking, finally picking up a familiar presence. She attempted tapping at Byleth's shoulder, but in failing to properly contact him, she waited impatiently for him to look back. What is wrong? Your sister is nearby, Suthies said. It might take a lot from me, but I am now able to see what she is up to. Would you mind me going to her? She's probably finding more information as we speak. Byleth nodded, but as the girl left, he gave a snarky comment. Must you be so desperate for intel, that you are wasting your energy to see her? I am sure you can take things from here, even if my leaving means you being able to turn back the hands of time less. Just remember not to abuse the divine pulse whilst I am gone. You will force all sorts of complications with every attempt to right your wrongs. Understood. After he gave his approval, a green light had enveloped Suthies. As she transformed into nothing more but a green orb, it too had vanished after a few seconds. Byleth looked back at the group. Everyone, we are already in the passing for Magdrid Way. The conflict had already taken place before, but I expect you all to at the very least prepare for the worst of scenarios. Yes, Professor. Leading the charge onwards, Byleth was left to continue wondering. Many times when they were young, Byleth would always follow his orders. It was not uncommon for her to do something unordinary, but it was still worrying regardless. Usually, she never did get her way in taking charge of a battle, and this had meant Byleth could only allow her such responsibilities at critical times. Even in the Red Canyon, Byleth had failed to account for her misfortune, and it did not help at the time that she had very nearly gotten her group killed. He could only hope the best for his sister, and hopefully, Suthi's presence would be of some help. From what Byleth was told of Catherine, she was supposedly meant to be a spirited and cheerful individual. Sure, Byleth had only met her for a small amount of time, but she seemed dedicated as a knight of Sirius. That was all Byleth remembered about her brother's account of Catherine, but it was all she needed. Crossing over Magdrid Way, she was finally able to catch up to the knights. From up far, they seemed to simply be surveying the area. Byleth kept charging forwards, greeting the knights that noticed her, and stating her business to those that did not. Many of them were tired, which made sense. Magdrid Way was a field of open pathways for travelers to follow. To anyone, this was yet another route to their destination, and the church placed far less importance in it than they had done so for the Red Canyon. Not many knights were situated here, and to Byleth, it seemed much of the reliance for this mission would have had to come from the class, as well as Catherine herself. Crossing Gertrude through the fogged fields away from them all, Byleth looked around her. It was misty on this day. Any time right now was a good way to start an attack, which was the one thing Byleth had not wished for. Thankfully, today the rest of the class would arrive as well. They did not have an annoyed steed with them, so they were sure to come anytime. Rather than doing what she would have done, which was to be fussing over her wasted time, Byleth simply parked Gertrude in a safe location. She was far too scared to ride the horse, let alone committed to advanced combat with it. Leaving the faraway forest, she ran across the area, back to where she had wanted to go. It took some time of constantly asking around, but eventually she was found. A woman with slightly darkened skin, rough blonde hair, stylish armor, and an abnormally spiked sword. Going close to her, Catherine recognized Byleth by clothing. Initially showing some hesitation, Catherine prepared her mood as she smiled at her arrival. "You must be the sister, right?" she cheered, helping Byleth up. "Hopefully you should know me. My name's Catherine." Byleth nodded, acknowledging her associate's guesswork. "Are the rest of the class here?" No, but they'll be here soon." Looking around again, she inquired to Catherine about her thoughts on the circumstance. "I take it this isn't a big deal, right? I don't see too many knights here." "No, but a class full of students, 2 very advanced teachers, and a very capable knight such as myself is enough for this, surely," Catherine cheered. Byleth could only pull a glum expression, remembering what had happened the day before. Right, yeah, of course, clearly, they had underestimated the situation. Byleth recalled Lonato's speech, and his influence. It felt bad to be reporting this scenario to Catherine, so she kept the information to herself for now. As the two had silenced themselves for a bit of time, they began to realize that waiting in the cold air was a tiring endeavor. Catherine was quick to grow impatient, and speaking to one of the knights under her, she gave a set of commands and shot a cocky smirk at Byleth. Walking on ahead, she looked back, waving her hand at Byleth. "Come on. We can go ahead. I ordered my men to look out for your class, so it's fine for us to survey the area." Byleth was hesitant at first. She was not comfortable around her. At best, if her brother came, she would have liked to seek his advice, and right now she was regretting some of the choices she made. She was desperate to meet Catherine at first, but it now seemed intimidating upon further inspection. Looking back, she hoped for her brother to arrive soon. Running up to chase after her, Byleth stopped once she saw a curious green glow beside her. In waiting for it to widen, she was pleasantly surprised to find Suthi's was the source of the glow. The girl initially fell down in clumsiness, but was quick to recover. After looking around briefly, she muttered to herself. Seems we are not too far from here. It is good to know everyone will be reunited eventually. Turning back, Suthies greeted her new carrier. I am glad to see that you are all right. Apologies for the swift intrusion, but seeing as we were close, I needed an easier way to gather intel, so I came to you. You sure brother wasn't just too boring for you? That too, Suthies muttered. But that's beyond our interests right now. Tell me the current circumstances. Why did you leave so early? It's a bit of a long story. I'd have to do it later, and I doubt you have enough power to stop time right now for me to explain it all. Billet shied away, not wanting to fully reveal everything about Ash. But that woman over there. She's one of the captains of the Knights of Sirios. Suthies looked towards Catherine. Before continuing her observations, she hovered back to Billet, pointing for her to initiate a talk with her ally. It would look much too suspicious for you to simply be in a daze behind her. I want you to talk to her. Ask her about why she is here, and see if you can get a glance into her role at the church. Billet sighed. Eventually, she had to talk to Catherine properly. If not for Ash, it was for Suthi's journey to find out more about herself. Finally reaching out the courage to fully start a conversation. Billet leaped forward, slowing down after reaching her companion. Catherine gave a heartful glance at her, to which Billet could only reply with a nervous chuckle. Say, I know we haven't talked too much, but I wanted to ask you a question. Ask away. She replied. I hear you're relatively new here, so I guess it's my job to help you out as our new recruit. Oh, thanks. Suthies noticed that upon giving a weak response, Catherine gave a disgruntled glare. That sword. Billet pointed at the spiked weapon on her sheath. What exactly is it? It's Thunderbrand. Her expression of negativity vanished. Suthies noticed it was only gone for an instant. It would seem Catherine was brightened up upon being asked about the sword she was so passionate about. I can't believe you didn't know. My sword has some special history behind it. It's a hero's relic, so that should tell you what you didn't know already. Billet lit her face in curiosity, to which after a nudge from Suthies, she inquired more about the concept of a hero's relic. Catherine simply sighed, telling what should have been common knowledge in the academy. Long ago, the goddess was said to bless 10 divine weapons to heroes of old. Eventually, those weapons were passed on to the bloodlines of their respective families, and they were regarded as the heroes' relics of old, said to contain power unseen under normal standards. I'm one of them, and whilst I admit it's an honor to wield, I'm afraid we won't need to do that sort of thing today. Why not? Today's meant to be a cleanup mission. Some fighting had already taken place, but we took care of it before you came here. We're just here to make sure the area is safe again, since Magdrid Way is usually a good route for traveling merchants to get to the monastery. Billet could tell that the knights had gotten the wrong idea about this situation, but she was also confused. Finally resolving herself, she asked Catherine something she had been wanting to know for a while. Forgive me for overstepping my boundaries, but if this is such an easy mission, then why were you picked for it? No harm in asking something unknown, I suppose. Catherine assured. She thought about her answer for a bit before finally taking slow steps in speaking. Lonato has history with me. Seeing as he's the one inciting these rebellions in the first place, I wanted to see him off properly, but all we've been fighting for a while is a bunch of goons from nearby villages. For a while now, he's harbored resentment for the church, but I didn't think it was enough to do all of this. I just need to put down the old man before he falls down further. That's all. If I see him today, I can resolve something I did in the past. If not, then that's that. It was a vague answer. Suthies whispered to Biletta's ear, telling her it was all right for now, but this was not the case in her mind. Deep inside, Billet felt annoyed. She did not want to put down Lonato, but neither did she want to disobey the orders given to her. Stopping in her walk, she looked back at Catherine. Hey, listen, I wanted to ask something. The knight was confused at first. Seeing as Billet was giving special attention to this question, she stopped her patrol. What's wrong, Professor? Catherine turned back. The two had stopped their surveillance now, and sensing they needed some time alone, Suthies dispersed elsewhere into Baletta's mind. She had sensed her time of intrusion was coming to an end, and had still wanted to save her energy for when it was needed. Giving a wave of goodbye, she sincerely hoped her carrier would not jeopardize the mission. Balette was an immature fool to Suthies, but she meant goodwill with her intentions. She hoped that with her fleeting power, the upbeat professor would not ruin their positive relation with the knight beside her. It's about Lonato. I wanted to know if we could spare him. An irritated glare crossed the knight's face. That's not gonna happen. Catherine shot a quick response, causing Balette to flinch. Wait, why not? He's trespassed church law, gotten innocents killed, and abused his status as a noble. I don't think there's any moral high ground the man has above us, Catherine recounted. Under the church's rulings, he's done enough to face divine punishment. You should know that by now. I know that much, but you said you had history with him, right? Couldn't you use it to help him? Her voice got ahead of her. As much as she tried her hardest not to sound desperate, Baletta's heightened speed gave enough away for Catherine to finally get annoyed. I mean, I'm sure you could convince him to dash. The man wants revenge upon me, and the church as well, including the archbishop. Catherine voiced, now finally agitated. She lowered her stance, and placing her hand across the handle of her sheath, Balette flinched. Look, I don't know how much responsibility Lady Rhea entrusted you with, but it's far more than I think you deserve. Where do you get your reasoning for disobeying Lady Rhea's orders? No, that's not it. Balette panicked. I just think it isn't right to kill him. He's already sent hundreds to their deaths. Catherine gave a piercing glare. This was no longer the cheerful captain she had initially met at first, but an offset soldier who knew far too much about these sorts of scenarios to deal with unneeded resolutions. Look, Professor, I'll be honest, I don't trust you, and neither do I trust your brother. As someone who's worked under Lady Rhea for years now, I've admired her, and I had to accept things as they came, no matter what. She sounded passionate upon mentioning the Archbishop's name. Balette thought she must have meant a lot if she were still addressing her by her title, even without her presence. Your only saving grace was that I heard you were both hardened warriors, so I still had hopes for you, but this is beyond pathetic. Walking faster, Catherine did not look back at Balette. We only need to survey the remains of this bloodied battlefield. Let's get this mission done so we no longer see each other again. I think it's what we both want. She had never been lectured at with such ferocity in all her life. Usually, Gerald would scold Balette, but he was always patient, and Byleth was a whole different scenario entirely. Flinching and looking down in regret, Balette silently listened to Catherine. Nothing would get through to her now, and it was her own fault for upsetting her mood. Still, that did not change the fact that Lonato was on his way to the church's battlefield. The two continued walking on. It is understandable, to say the least. I pity the sorrow on you too, Suthies spoke. Balette was too down to be shaken at the sudden appearance of her voice. I gather you have a lot more to say, but I also think so too does that knight. Fret not, child. As a person, she holds no grudge against you, but as a knight, she has no idea what to think of you, especially if we include the fact that the Archbishop had chosen you so soon. What Suthies said was true. The twins had seen very little of the staff. Sure, Manuela and Hanneman were accepting of her, but what about the knights? She recalled Seath, too, had said something of a similar sort to her as well. There were likely people who worked tenfold as hard as the twins to even seek Rhea's acknowledgments, and yet the twins had been assigned to teach so early on, with so little experience. Balette was now beginning to slowly understand it all. She felt she was being selfish, and it had soon turned to guilt. Before she reached to tap Catherine's shoulder to further conversation with her, Suthies reversed time to prevent this second interaction. I do not encourage showing weakness to her. You are a teacher of battle. Demonstrating meager traits will send you downwards into a spiral of mistrust. I don't understand. What do I do, then? Focus on the mission, Suthies said bluntly. It is why you left so early, and it is why you cannot talk of anything else towards Catherine. Once your initial objectives are all done, then you can truly extinguish any flames of doubt in your mind. Billet listened with understanding. As much as she wanted to disobey her, she could understand the stance that Suthies was taking. As usual, she followed along. This time, when tapping Catherine's shoulder, she spoke about a different topic entirely. "I'm sorry I annoyed you, but is it okay if I explain my side of the story?" She stayed quiet for a bit, but did not signal for Billet to stop, so she continued. "It's about Lonato's family." Catherine now looked back at Billet. "I wanted to talk about his son Dash." Catherine's eyes widened. Before the conversation could continue any further, the green muddy road ahead had widened till nothing was completely visible. Catherine pulled out Thunderbrand, and so too did Billet pull out her own sword. Their conversation would once again, unfortunately, have to be postponed. "Thunderstrike Cassandra." "Lonato." Billet immediately identified. Although they could not see him, she had remembered his voice from back when she was in the nearby town. "He's here. He's got a mage somewhere augmenting his voice, as well as the fog. Both of us walked right into an ambush. The most likely place the old man is, should be far off from here." Billet listened attentively. Somewhere, the rest of the class were most likely also out there starting their own battle as well. They were too far off to help them, but so too were they likely too far off from killing Lonato himself. As Catherine was about to turn around to inspect their enemies, Billet tapped her shoulder once more. "My students are some of the strongest people I know. Leave them." Pointing back, she motioned for the two to press on forward. "We went on ahead. We're where they least expect, and we're also the ones likely to take Lonato. Let's go and meet him, the old man, you called him, right?" She smirked. Dashing forwards, Billet followed after her. "I still don't trust you, but I admit you have spunk. For now, then, I'll try to at least cooperate with you." Chapter 34, Their Strong Union. The air thickened, the mist came, and the class was suddenly on high alert. Byleth, knowing what would happen, had quickly taken out his sword. Assembling the students, he kept his voice at the usual minimum, knowing that he had the potential to possibly incite panic if all went wrong. This was the possibility he most wanted to avoid. "Everyone, I want you all to stay together." "Professor, is that you? Where are you all?" This mist it brings a rather unfortunate viewing of everyone. Some of the group was already lost. He knew what to do. Years prior, the twins had once assisted Geralt in fighting atop a high mountain peak. It had of course transitioned within a foggy territorial dispute, and as such, Geralt was sure to teach Byleth all about the prime tactics for such a scenario. Byleth noted the students that were near him. The two students who had battalions on them were the easiest to find. Accordingly, they had ordered their troops to stay beside them. As they and the other students joined with Byleth, he noticed it was only Bernadetta and Linhard that had been scattered. "Try to make discreet sounds. We will approach you accordingly. Are you both together?" he asked, making sure to get a further grasp of the situation. No. Ack." A scream suddenly followed. Byleth readied a stance of running but was immediately calmed afterwards. "Linhard, don't sneak up on me like that." "Apologies, but did it ever occur to you that I might be as unrelaxed as you are?" Following their voices, he finally found them. The pair happily retreated to the class they were comfortable around. Looking at his small army, Byleth noticed every student had readied stances for battle. Of course, even the seemingly bravest of them were likely scared. "It is likely a mage has heightened the fog from when we first came here. Do not worry. This is simply a strategy to disarm our forces, creating an advantage for the enemy as a result." "Are you saying an ambush is coming?" Edelgard asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes. Depending on who we are up against, they may already know the area well. We will need to tread carefully." Upon saying that, someone appeared from the mist. Not even Byleth had noticed them, but the quick instincts from Petra had disabled them. The soldier was floored to the ground, yelping in pain. Indeed, she was the fastest in the class, and this time, it was perfect for a foggy area such as this. "I am needing help," Petra grunted. "Will you be holding him down for me?" Some of the soldiers in her battalion responded, helping pin the enemy down. Seeing as the one they caught was screaming and struggling for an escape, Byleth had deduced they were not a knight of Sirios. Kneeling, he noticed they wore little armor, but his screams of aggression still meant he would not surrender. Giving a signal to do as she should, Byleth allowed Petra to kill them. She drew her sword upwards, and whilst she hesitated at first, seeing how this person was aiming to injure Byleth had made her focus on her initiative. As a long stab was made on his back, a spew of blood had splashed upwards. Petra avoided it, looking back so as not to hurt her goals. "I don't get it," Casper spoke. "Why wear barely any armor for an ambush? Usually it helps with maintaining high speeds, which was likely done for this surprise attack on us." The class listened attentively, trying to wholly accept this fact. Even if they did, Byleth still had his suspicions. Any normal soldier could have easily parried Petra's movements and killed her, or they would have been strong enough to completely push her aside as she floored them. As much as he wanted to not think of this possibility, it was likely that these soldiers were untrained. "Professor," Dorothea put forward an idea, hesitantly. "If a mage is the one making this mist appear, then shouldn't we put them down first?" "Correct." He completely missed how Dorothea was made uncomfortable from his answer. "I want everyone to stay together. As we move forward, we are to locate the mage making this fog appear, whilst also putting down any soldier making movements against us." The class accepted this order. Now finally assembled, they walked forward only if they saw the sights of their peers with them. It was too late to think about how this mission had gone horribly wrong. Every student had accepted it, and so they steadied themselves for combat. Byleth gave a signal, and the class slowly moved forward. Coupled with the fog, the grassy grounds below them made the group feel like they were making very little progress. Still, though, they ventured forth. After making some headway, more of the enemy had come. The main frontline fighters were completely caught off guard, but even still, a Thoron beam from Dorothea and an arrow from Bernadetta had sent them down in defeat. They winced in pain, but still foolishly got up to fight them. Occasionally, Edelgard and Petra called for their battalions to take over if another ambush had started. By this point, the rest of the class had already been aware whenever an enemy unit appeared. A swift swing from Edelgard and Casper had sent them down fully, screaming, "You scum!" They yelled, shouting with every last breath they had. "You'll do anything to us. I'd rather die than be at your rule." Of all the last words you could choose, Edelgard recounted solemnly. "You choose words of pure anger and deceit. I'm sure there are many more people you could have dedicated those fleeting breaths to." The man screaming looked at her. Using all the air left in his body, he screamed, "You witch!" He yelled. "Spend your final moments in agony." They still tried their hardest to crawl to the group, but Byleth had already told the rest of the class to leave by then. Left to rest, they still had their swords clenched to their fists, even at death's door. By now, the class was growing weary. Looking around to see their battalions, Edelgard and Petra noticed that even their troops were being worn down. Soon enough, they would be unable to fight. "Professor, we can't keep this up for longer," Edelgard said, hoping for a new solution to their problems. "I misunderstood the situation. They recognize their strength against us, and they wish to wear us down. These men are fighting us knowing that they will lose in the end." "If what you say is the case," Linhard wondered aloud, "why do they curse us so when put down? They still are not fully committed to giving their life for the cause of their fight." Byleth answered this question harshly. Most of the students looked down in shame, still not used to the idea of taking a life. Realizing they had to dismiss their feelings, they looked back up at their teacher. "Professor, what do we do now?" Bernadetta asked, shyly. "Where would you hide in an ambush?" Byleth did not hesitate to test her knowledge, even in the midst of a battle. "You are tasked amid battle to fight from the sides. To surprise your enemy, you are told to stay hidden. In a battlefield that is already deranged of true sight, where then do you make your enemy's vision even harder?" She stuttered. "I don't like having to do this now of all places dash." "Answer swiftly, then." As harsh as those words sounded, they gave comfort to Byleth's students that words could not describe in the moment. Right, think, in a battle that's already shrouded in mist, where would a lone Bernie like me hide? I guess when I put my finger on it, a forest is a good idea. No matter the situation of a battle, climbing the trees would probably help a little more in the fog if you do it beforehand. Wait. Casper had made a realization. They're not in the forest to attack us, but they're there to hide from us. Byleth nodded. Signaling for his class to move forward, they followed after him. Seeing a shrouded forest beside them, they recognized it as an area suitable for hiding. Byleth turned to his students. We have been ambushed throughout this entire battle today. I hope you have all noticed that. I want you all to realize that the very same can happen when we enter this forest. Do not be too forward, and always stay hesitant. The class nodded. Understanding their situation, they moved. As they looked through the forest, the shade from the high trees had only made their vision more shrouded. Some of the students were now bumping into one another, and each of them had a hard time traversing the area. The students were confused. They had now reached the inner depths of the forest, but there was still no sign of the enemy. Looking around them, their eyes tensed. Finally, Bernadetta had fired an arrow. They're everywhere. They drew their weapons. After being noticed, the enemy had come forward. This time, no one untrained fought them. These were seasoned knights and mercenaries that had been hired through Lonato. The class was not trained fully in combat, but they tried their hardest to manage. Holding off so many attacks at once was a challenge, however. Byleth disarmed a few of the enemy units, quickly looking around to see if anyone had sustained injuries. Few of the long-range fighters needed space, and this was becoming a rarity in this battle. The enemy was closing in, and the lost blood and fatigue from their fighting was tiring the class. We need to find the mage. Edelgard cried. He isn't here. Byleth closed his eyes. He needed time to think. Dispatching a few more of them, he realized they were all slowly being cornered. He wanted to disarm the entire army himself, but the students were a different challenge to maintain. If he were to go alone right now, no proper prediction could be made as to who would get caught up in this fighting. A hostage situation was very capable of happening. Byleth remembered some students were of royal lineage, and chances were the group were being targeted for this reason as well. I have an idea. Edelgard shouted, frantically. Go on, Edie. Dorothea struggled, being pushed back into a corner. Petra, I'm sure you're capable of climbing any tree, especially seeing as you hail from Brigid. You won't be able to see far, but head to the slightly leveled branches of the tree behind us and scout the mage controlling this fog. Bernadetta said it herself, remember? You should be able to see ahead, and we can take it from here as you stage an ambush. It is a good idea, Byleth acknowledged. Anyone who is a close-ranged fighter and feels confident in the field, raise your hand, besides Petra. Edelgard, Ferdinand, and Casper had put their hands in the air. What are you planning, Professor? Hubert hissed. Casper, you are the shortest of them all, and capable. Upon hearing this mixed praise, Casper lowered his hand with an unamused expression. Petra will guide you from above. Both of you can stage an ambush and rush through the enemy barrage. One from below, and another from above. It was a smart extension to Edelgard's original plan. As the two students agreed to this idea, Petra rushed upwards from the tree beside them. Byleth signaled his hand, and the rest of the class engaged in more combat. Thankfully, the battalions on hand were useful in making a shield across a wider area. It was too soon to be cornered, and everyone had to count on both Petra and Casper to pull through. Up above, Petra had sprinted across. Reaching a suitable branch, she tested its weight. It was able to support her. Not minding the slight thinness, she first tiptoed across, eventually hanging down as she came further. Casper followed after her, sneaking through the troops who were far too focused on the class to notice him escaping. It took a lot of dodging as they ran past, but he was desperate to keep up with Petra. Where's the mage? You see him yet? I am needing a moment. Petra shouted from above. Casper was impatient, but he continued fighting in the middle. He has been seen, but I am also noticed. Huh. A beam fired from above. Petra fell screaming. As she landed beside a group of soldiers, the ones around her had poised their weapons towards them. Casper ran beneath them, bringing her up, and dragging her away. The two of them glared around them. They were far too into the enemy forces to call for the rest of the class to assist them. The mage that fired at you, that's definitely the one making this fog, right? Petra nodded. Yes. Stopping his run, Casper completely ignored the fact they were being surrounded. Turning back to her, he asked one important question to her. We take him out, and the rest of this is a breeze. You wanna work with me on this? I am always said to be the most fast of everyone. And I guess I'm the shortest, so surely I can squeeze by and catch up to you, right? The two immediately realized that they had a plan. Grinning to one another, all previous conflicts had ceased, and their eyes gave a glint of anticipation. Soon. 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 Casper mumbled. Petra steadied her sword. Give it a moment. The enemy braced themselves. Somehow, seeing these two with such an expression was frightening. Finally, Casper screamed, and Petra dashed. One by one, they hurtled through. A quick line of blood had splashed around them. Petra and Casper ignored the stains landing upon them, keenly focusing on the mage from afar. The mage was given space to fire his spells, and thankfully this had made just enough leeway for the two to pull a clean takeout. The two split up, but now each unit of the enemy was honed in on them. From afar, the chaos had leaked into the border around the class, and the barrier regulating them was dissipating. Get those two! One of the enemies cried, but suddenly a cloaked voice cut her off. Leave them to me. It was the mage. As he retreated backwards, his voice boomed louder. 2 skemps should be enough, even for me. The duo was originally away from each other at first, but in finally reuniting, they saw the enemy before them. The mage shot out a ball of fire. Still, they both dodged it. They dashed towards the mage. Occasionally, they split up, then joined again, then split up, then joined again. Quit playing games with me, you punks. Casper and Petra did not listen. They continued circling him, confusing him. Many beams of energy had been fired. Parts of the forest were being torn down, and trees had collapsed in retirement. It was a spectacle for the eyes, and from afar, the class had noticed the chaos. Petra, let's do it now. Yes, Casper. They dashed, pulling their legs as fast as they were possibly capable of pulling them. The mage screamed now, finally realizing his fate. Casper and Petra grinned, closing their eyes to avoid seeing anything harmful to them, and with one swift strike from each of them, 2 opened wounds had splashed blood across the mage. He fell, gasping for air. Petra and Casper knelt in the finish, looking back at one another after they had regained a level head. The mage saw them, and croaking in his last breaths, he threw curses indecipherable to the human ear. The students ignored him and began heading back to the class, eventually collapsing in fatigue. Look at us. We're completely wiped, huh? Petra chuckled, weakly. We have other people to help us as we rest. One day. I will not fight like this. One day, we'll fight together, like we did today, even if you're still deciding everything between us. This startled Petra at first, but after giving it some thought, she smiled softly. I do not dislike you, Casper, but I also do not think you the most trusting as well. I am in some agreement with your words. The two closed their eyes, finally collapsing in the losing heat of the battle. The forces were disarmed, and all that was left had been Lonato's unit up ahead. Whether Billette and Catherine could work together to beat them was a question on its own. Still, the class had to lean onto them. With the conditions laid out in the way that they were, it would seem this month's mission was wholly dependent on them and Lonato's inconclusive fate. Chapter 35, Lonato, the Vengeful Hero. The two were rushing, even after the mist had cleared. Somewhere beyond, an abandoned ruined silhouette had appeared. They were relieved to see the end of their trip was near. Despite all that Catherine had said beforehand, unfortunately, the pair had found it very difficult to cooperate when the fog had overtaken. With each ambush that appeared, they found themselves getting in each other's way. This had continued for a while, and now more than ever, Catherine was agitated by Billette in her constant need to try and help. The ruins were just a few steps off. The area was crumbled and abandoned into obscurity, making for a perfect hideout for foes even on horseback. Some soldiers spotted the duo straight away, catching them off guard. Catherine and Billet faced them, back to back. "Just stay out of my way, and I'll pay you the same way." She was slightly hurt by this, but still offered help. "All right, but just call out if you need anything." "Low chance of that happening, but I'll work with you." They dashed, clashing their swords against foes on horses, and warriors in groups. It was a tough battle, but the two had been experienced in fighting hordes of enemies before. Using a soldier's swing against them, Billet pushed her sword against the enemy's axe, causing it to shatter as another warrior had accidentally damaged it. Using their slightly stunned paws, she slid her sword across the two soldiers. "You dirty church follower!" one of them called out. It was a feminine voice behind their mask. "Please, don't make this harder than it has to be. Everything about us was just an easy hurdle for you, you damn liar." Those were her final words. Billet stopped fighting upon hearing this. Her hands shivered, but she gripped it hard with the other to contain it. Old memories of this sort of behavior had sent a feeling of reminiscence across her head. Holding back her solemn expression, she needed time to take her current circumstances in. For a moment, however, Billet had unfortunately been too lost in thought to realize she was in the midst of battle. Some of the enemy had noticed. Originally seeing her as a threat, they rushed forwards to make a clean slice. Billet was unaware. Catherine noticed, and dealing with her last few foes, she rushed to Billet. "You idiot!" The sword was going to cut it close. Catherine reached out her hand to grab Billet, but it was too late. As she pushed her aside, she only helped the sideways swing of an axe piercing a bloody wound on her. Before Catherine could widen her eyes, time stopped, froze over, and rewound into a time just before the slice. She was back, and realizing now her prior mistake, she dodged back successfully and jumped upwards to make a clean cut. Catherine had just finished her job, before turning back to Billet. "Careful not to mess up," she shouted. Billet nodded faintly. Looking beside her, she saw Suthies, weakened and kneeling on the ground. Before consulting her, Billet felt a pang of pain hit her head. She groaned in pain, finally looking up at Suthies after the pain had lowered. "You must be careful with how you use my powers," she said. "I saved you now, but you need to remember I took great liberties in making it to you, especially when taking into account that my connection to you is far weaker than your brother's. Please, do not lower your focus." She slowly vanished into a glimmer, however still found an ounce of strength to give her final warning. "I need to take time to regain myself. Please do not rewind the flow of time until then, lest you suffer consequences even more dire than the simple headache that was imposed on you just now." Billet nodded her head. Turning back to Catherine, they looked to the final few warriors around them. Before they could jump, though, a voice had boomed. It was Lonato's voice. "Leave them for me. I need to make sure of something." Steadily, the soldiers cleared their way. A rough man on horseback slowly came, giving a mean glare towards Catherine. He softened very slightly when seeing Billet, however, it was clear he still had his guard up. "I was told to look for a woman by the name of Billet. Are you the one who asked for me?" Catherine looked at her in confusion, and as everyone's attention fixed on the professor, she nodded her head. Yes." Billet remembered that before she had left, she had tasked the man in the village to find contact with Lonato. At the very least, it had happened. How he managed to do so was a mystery to her, especially in these dire circumstances, but Billet felt grateful for this opportunity. "Mr. Lonato, sir, I wanted to talk to you. Are you aware of where you are at the moment, girl, and of the battlefield you stand on?" "Yes, I am, but this was the only way I could make it in time, and I'm sorry to trouble you now, but I needed to do all this to make sure I could have gotten here as quick as I did." "Hold on." Catherine was about to take action, but a sword in front of her from Billet stopped her. "Please, before you do anything, I just want to talk to him." There was silence after saying that. All eyes fixed on Catherine. After looking at the determination upon Biletta's face, she gave a face of resignation. Sighing to herself, she drew her sword back. This was the most fierce she had seen Billet act, and Catherine wanted to see what she was hoping to achieve with such a feeling. It's all on you. This is the most spunk I've seen from you so far, so make it count, Catherine admitted, defeated for now. I'm still keeping my eyes out, though. Billet nodded in agreement to her terms. You brought Cassandra with you? Lonato asked, confused at the mixed reception both his foes were giving him. She and I were tasked with working together. Do you not know who you are alongside? Billet admitted to herself that she was not. Shaking her head sideways, she admitted her fault. I wanted to speak with you honestly, sir. It's important, and I promise to tell everything I know and admit things which I don't. It was a brief moment of peace. Lonato motioned his horse to go closer to her, still maintaining a tall view when near Billet. Looking at her, he motioned for her to continue. What do you wish to say? I don't want you to do this, sir. You should know that I'm a teacher at the Officers' Academy, and I learned a lot about the world. I'll admit, I don't know everything, but I just wanted to stop this needless violence, which is why I wanted to talk with you. He sighed. It was clear this was a statement he did not want to hear, and putting his hands on his head in slight annoyance, he faced Billet. You're too innocent for the battlefield, girl. Did you really think you could stop an entire army from fighting after asking such a simple plea? Billet hesitantly replied. Yes, I did. Do you know why I am fighting in this way? No, sir. She looked down upon the ground in weakness. I don't know anything, and I hate it. At the very least, I think you could reach your goal regardless through peaceful means, and I was hoping to let you see that. Now, Lonato grumbled. He looked at Catherine, then back at Billet. Cassandra is still giving me an unpleasant expression, even after us calling a ceasefire. Do you not understand? With some people, you can never reason with them unless you talk through the language of action. Sir, I dash. Look up, girl. Do it now, lest you risk the chance of me killing you. I know you won't dash. You're too innocent for a battlefield, let alone for that sword in your hand. Lonato still maintained a calm tone. He was sympathetic for Billet, but her words did nothing to change his ideals. I can see the sort of person you are just from this conversation alone. You're one of the kind and innocent ones, wanting the best outcome through the best means. You don't like fighting, don't you? Billet froze at those words. Did you truly want to come here? I did. She raised her voice. She had too much shame to look up at him, but her deepest desires had come spilling onto the ground. I wanted to talk with you so much, and that's why I came here. I wanted to come here to stop this mess. I wanted your son to be happy. His eyes widened. Lonato raised his lance in sudden fury. Catherine noticed. She shoved Billet aside, landing her on the dirt across her. Quickly, and just in time, Catherine raised Thunderbrand upwards, and the two weapons clashed. Lonato's spear slid downwards upon contact with the sword, but he managed to tighten his grip just before it fell off. Ignoring her, he turned Billet. How dare you mention my son, acting self-righteous in the name of your foolish church? I should have known better. No, sir, your son wants you to stop doing this. He wants you not to drag innocents into all of this. What do you know about a boy who died in the name of peace? He was furious now, but Billet was caught in confusion. Lonato charged his steed towards her. Now, she finally looked up. Billet was not able to get up fully, but she had at least raised her sword. Seeing his heightening speed, however, she was briefly frightened. Instead, she changed her form of action in a split second and dodged to the side. Catherine ran to Billet. Helping her up, she looked with a spiteful glare at Lonato. As the horse turned back, it faced Billet once again, but a quick signal from Lonato stopped it from its planned assault. Stupid old man. You realize she wasn't talking about Christophe yet. Billet was far too busy recovering to fully understand this. You know now, don't you? I'm sure you're aware, Ash knows you're doing this. Are you really going to continue after hearing that? He looked down, gritting his teeth. Finally, Billet registered what had been said. First looking at Catherine, she knew she had not truly pieced all the pieces that the puzzle of battle had to offer her. After looking at Lonato, she could finally see it. A face of full regret. "Who is Christophe?" Catherine was silent, but Belette persisted. "Catherine, I can tell you no." "Who's Christophe? Please, tell me." "Someone she betrayed." Lonato rode around the two, only looking at Belette whilst speaking. "My son, and that witch's once best friend." "Professor, did Ash not ever tell you that he had a brother?" Thinking back on it, Belette remembered a minor part of Ash's request. Back then, he had said that despite already having a son of his own, Lonato had adopted Ash at the time. In finally piecing these small details together, Belette realized that Christophe was the son that caused Lonato to rebel in anger. He mentioned it, but I forgot about it." "I'm sorry." "You're an idiot for taking action without knowing the full story," Catherine hissed. Annoyed by this hostility towards Belette, Lonato raised his spear towards Catherine, but Belette instead stood up to shield her. He brought back his weapon afterwards, knowing no further action could be taken up until the whole story was explained. "Do you know of the tragedy of Dusker?" Shaking her head, Lonato sighed. "A region away from here, along the northern coasts of Fodlan houses a rural tribe of people, known as the Dusker tribe. A great conflict and unrelenting stigma had led to their abuse, and many from the kingdom of Faergus had a disliking for them. The potential threat for danger was immense back then, and this only brought about more conflict. On Imperial year 1176, talks were being held upon the people's rights, what was to be done with them, as well as how to diplomatically settle this tension. The talks were conducted a little too late, however. Many politicians were murdered, with nobles and royals thrown into the mix. It was a time of chaos, with the Faergus territory seeing a sea of flames and blood across their lands. It was a time too horrific to remember, a time best forgotten. Even remembering it now, not many can give a good response to the very name of it. They shouldn't, for they suffered more than they ever deserved. That's horrible. Belette looked down, silently. She was now getting closer to the mystery. Christophe's fate had somehow linked to this. As her eyes followed Lonato riding around them, her interest only strengthened. The Dusker tragedy is a series of 2 parts. What I've discussed so far was the first, but the second was the eventual executions of those accused of the murders that ensued prior. Somewhere in Fodlan, in an area too far for me to properly reach, my own son was accused, trailed unfairly, and executed with a knight's misused accusation and authority. Now, he glared at Catherine. Cassandra was the one who did it. The very one whom my son used to write endless praises for in his letters to me, was also the one who brought him to his unfair demise. Suddenly, without a moment's notice, Catherine leapt up in annoyance. Catching Belette off guard, she pushed her colleague away in an attempt to deal a critical blow towards Lonato. "I did what had to be done," she snapped loudly, frustrated. Belette fell onto the floor, screaming a little in the process. Ignoring the ache from the forced fall, she quickly got up and looked at the two engaging in combat. As soon as her thunderbrand had connected with Lonato's lance, Belette screamed for the two to stop whilst getting up, but was ultimately ignored. "Lies, all of what you say is lies," Lonato screamed. "You both went to the same academy together, you helped each other, ate together, and fought beside each other. After all of that, Christophe's own classmate had been the very reason for death. You could have prevented all this. I know it. Don't reach your nose where it doesn't belong, old man. It'll only bring you trouble." She had enough. Before even landing another attempted blow to Lonato, Catherine felt her legs falter. Tripping her up in an attempt to stop the fighting, Belette held Catherine down with her arms, however still aimed her sword towards Lonato in worry of being attacked. With his positioning upon his stallion, Belette was sure that his might alone was enough to kill her alongside Catherine, but she trusted Ash's words. If Lonato were truly the kind man he was meant to be, then he would think before he leapt. "Girl, what are you doing?" He could see her hands shaking in hesitation. Belette's loud breathing alone was enough to tell him that he still had the upper hand. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not ready to kill. I envy such innocence. You have the same kindness that I saw in Ash many years ago." It would pain me to kill you like this. I've killed people before, sir. I've done it for years now. Lonato had a saddened face upon hearing this. Sir, I don't have children, and I've never had someone close to me die. I've only got rid of whomever I was told to. I've seen it all. My brother and I have grown up seeing families distressed and justice not served. It was on off occasions, but it hurt every time. I hated that, and I still do. With all due respect, sir, I don't want to be seeing you do that very thing. I ask, intending to sacrifice everything I have, please can you stop this? I beg you. Just like Ash was all those years ago, some of those people are barely making it by, and yet they're being led into a battle of unrelated revenge for you. Looking down in remorse, Lonato closed his eyes and sighed. His reluctance to aim his lance towards Billette had now startled Catherine. I understand very well where you come from. You have the same kindness as that boy. How is he? How is my Ash? At this, Billette smiled. She got up, releasing Catherine, whilst bringing herself into a world of her own. He's worrying to death about you, but I told him I'd be there. He's quick with his words and keen with prices. I'd not have made friends with him if he was any other way. I'd be proud to be a parent of his like you. Friend. Lonato thought. You're a teacher, and yet you consider him one of your own. All my students are, sir. They're all my friends. I wanted to help, and I know I have no place in this, but I had to for him. I promised him. For him, and everyone else, I would shed my title as professor to bring their wishes to reality. Stopping for a second, Lonato gave some thought to Billette's ideology. Finally, she said his conclusive answer. In the event of my execution, can I entrust you to care for him, then? Wait, Billette was startled. What do you mean? No matter the outcome, I was always to be executed by the Central Church, but your words have hit a chord with me. I'll surrender for you, and for my adoptive son, too. Before Catherine could charge once more, the two had been startled as Lonato dismounted his horse. Smiling earnestly, he held his hands high, dropping his lance directly below. Looking towards her, he had no regrets about the actions he was about to take. Seeing Catherine's scornful look at this turnout gave him a sense of petty joy. She pushed past Billette, holding him down with more force than necessary. I guess I doubted you, Catherine said, not completely convinced. Take him. He's yours. I need to get the rope for safe measure. As Catherine slowly left, Billette could only stand shocked. She felt a tingle in her mind. Even though her hands were holding him together, she knew there was not a need to do so. You're smiling right now. Is that correct? I am, sir. I managed to let Ash see you again. At least before you say goodbye, he can know everything. She let go of Lonato finally in complete trust. How can you tell? Because that's exactly how Ash would have reacted. He chuckled. I still have much more to tell him. Lonato elaborated. I want to tell him that I regret dragging innocent people into this. To me, I knew what had to be done, and yet, this was the only way to do it. I became distant after Christophe died, and Ash was on the verge of leaving me as well. Life after it all happened had left me cold. I tried telling myself I would be fine, that I had one more son to take care of, but I couldn't. I couldn't have one of them. I wanted both of my beloved children to be in my life. I'd do anything for it. I guess I should have realized there was an extent to my actions. You can tell him all of that, sir. I've told him. Billette was confused by this response at first, however, Lonato continued. I've told someone like him, and now that person can relay everything with the understanding and intentions I would have tried to convey to him had he been there. More importantly, closing his eyes briefly, he opened them with a new gaze. You can tell him how much I love him. Now, she was really confused. As his hand shoved her onto the floor with more force than Catherine's previous shoves, the puzzle pieces had finally connected themselves. It turned out that Billette never truly attained what she desired. She could never fulfill that promise she made to Ash. She fell to the floor. In distress, she screamed. This alerted Catherine. Dropping the rope, She readied her thunderbrand as Lonato had charged towards her with his lance. All the screams in the world could not get them to stop. As a plunge had been made with one weapon, the other fell into the pool of blood. Any voice she would have wanted to make now had escaped her throat with no effect. Her eyes trembled. She tried screaming Suthi's name, but gave inaudible pleas, still begging for time to rework itself. Suthi's appeared hesitantly beside her with fatigue, but all she could do when witnessing her shocked face was close her eyes in sympathy. Looking onwards, watching as Lonato had used his last breaths to grasp for more air, she watched as his arms fell limp, with eyes still wide open. She could only watch as the blood from Lonato had trickled downwards, with the words from Suthi's personal thoughts merging with the scenery. In reality, it seems cutting the ropes of revenge required more than just a strong will, but the cutting of an ancient relic. To rewind time would be to rewrite history, but to retry and challenge fate itself would be the very highest extent of needless stubbornness. No matter how much one may try to shed their mistakes and rage, it could never be truly contained within. It would seem even if my strength had refilled itself, this was bound to happen. Taking her weapon back, Catherine phased through Suthi's, reaching a hand for Billet out of guilt. Her scornful face had been wiped off as if it had been changed upon viewing these new circumstances. Helping her get up, she looked at the dirted rope that was originally going to be used to tie up Lonato. "You'll get used to it soon. Don't worry. Stay strong for your students. We need to make our way back." Billet was silent. Finally attempting to compose herself, she stayed looking down in guilt and understanding. Finally, the two had gotten through to each other, but the cost of doing so was a high one. As the pair walked back, Catherine noticed a slip of paper resting on Lonato's pockets. She took it, leaving the unfortunate corpse by itself. Check the description for the links to the author.